Welcome to this first afternoon session. My name is Jiří Schneider. I'm Executive Director of Aspen Institute Center Europe. And I have a privilege to moderate this panel, which will be the long title of the panel, but it will be basically about relationship between European Union and United States. It's a bit awkward. We will talk America without Americans, but I hope in the debate could be some Americans in the audience, or maybe some representing the American views, or we can simulate that for that purpose. Otherwise, it wouldn't make sense. Let me introduce briefly the speakers, the four speakers, distinguished speakers we are having here. The panel is composed as a colorful panel because we are having people who are advising and to the policymakers. We're very close to policymakers. Some of them are implementing the policies, and some of them are researchers. And maybe they combine all the three functions at once. First, foremost, I would like to welcome Jana Puglierin from Germany. It's the head of Oppenheim Center for European Policy Studies at German Council on Foreign Relations, DGAP. Then Paweł Świeboda, who is known here in Prague, used to be a think tanker, but now advises the President of the European Union. And so he is very close to decision-making on the European level. Another one, Petko Draganov, next to my left, he's a political director at the Bulgarian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Those of you who know the role of political directors know that they are at the center on the working level of policy making in the European Union. Last but not least, Vassilis Ntousas from Greece, who's also political advisor, but is working for a foundation for European progressive studies. So I hope that we will have also some conservatives in the audience to balance the progressive wing in our panel. I'd like to give floor for opening statements, not long ones, 5 to 7 minutes to each of the speakers. And then we'll have some debate, maybe reactions to each other. We had a debate, are we going to agree on everything? And I think the outcome of our debate before was that probably not. So I'd like, we will not agree on everything, and there will be some debate. You're familiar with the Slido application, so please use Slido application to put your questions. Ideally, not anonymously, but if you wish, you can ask as anonymous as well. And then you can actually rank the questions, and we will take the questions which will be supported most as first. And in the end of the session, I'd like to also open the floor for the questions from the floor. So if you shy to write it down, don't be shy to ask the questions at the end. Now, Paweł, is this a beginning of something which is permanent, or it's just a curve and it will come to the new normal after what we experience here, the storm on the Atlantic in terms of policies. What's your sense of that? And of course, I'd like you to indicate, we'll come back to that later on, what kind of response Europe should do to the external influences coming on us from Washington, but also from other sides. Paweł, floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jiří. And I think you asked the most important question, namely, I mean, is it just question of this particular situation, or is it something bigger? And I looked at the shelf with my books yesterday before coming, and there was Gideon Rachman's Zero-Sum World. There was Ian Bremmer's Every Nation for Itself, all written a few years ago, already implying that the world is heading in this direction of little trust and constant confrontation. So it's not entirely new. The signs of this were present before. But I think the tempestuous nature of this situation in which we find ourselves shouldn't overshadow everything that we have achieved in the transatlantic relationship over the years. I mean, the transatlantic relations are not like a piece of china. They cannot be broken at the spur of the moment. The 70 years do matter and do weigh heavily. And we need to realize that Europe and the US have not been in perfect harmony during that period either. I mean, in February 2003, we had 3 million people on the streets of Rome protesting against the US-led invasion of Iraq. We also had hundreds of thousands demonstrating throughout 1980s in European cities against US nuclear deployments. So it's the nature of the disagreement which has surely changed. It's definitely of more fundamental character, but we've been there before. And I think the substance of the transatlantic relations is still much greater than what we are experiencing. I mean, let's face it, the tariffs that President Trump has imposed on European steel and aluminum products affect 1.7% of our exports to the US. So are we going to get emotionally on edge over 1.7% of our exports? However illegitimate, what is more illegal these tariffs are. I think we need to have an answer which is proportionate. We of course don't know what's coming up. We are dealing with US president who is distinct for his unpredictability. So we don't know what's coming up. But for the moment, we're not in a trade war. And I think Europe has negotiation in its DNA code. As our Secretary General at the Commission, Martin Selmayr, put it, Europe is a place where if someone burns the negotiating table, we bring in another one. So we negotiate until necessary. And we need to remember that Europe and the US still have the largest bilateral investment and trade relationship in the world. So for me, it's really a moment to start thinking about renewal of the transatlantic relationship. It may sound extremely paradoxical or even perverse, but I think it's a little bit like what you do on the stock exchange. You buy stocks when the price is low. And we are in trouble in the transatlantic context, but I think we should think about renewal. And I see three areas for that. Security and defense is clearly number one. And there we need to do a lot of homework. I mean, when you look at the figures, Western European spending on defense has fallen over the past 10 years by 1.6%. It has begun to rise again in the past 2 years. That's great news, but the increase is modest. It's in the range of 1.5–2%. It's Central Europe that has in fact done the bulk of the job, because the increase in Central Europe has been 12% 2016 to 2017. So here the effect has been felt more vividly. I believe that something is changing, and yesterday's Meisenberg declaration between France and Germany is meaningful, also because Germany decided to embrace the French-led European Intervention Initiative, which is about operations. It's not about paperwork, it's not about declaratory steps, it is about getting ready for operational engagement. I mean, this is what armies are for. I mean, they are for fighting. And this European Intervention Initiative is aimed to develop the capability to do that. So I think this is meaningful. The other meaningful element is what is happening at the European level on defense. So the proposal of the European Commission to create the European Defense Fund, to allocate 13 billion euro to it, this is extremely meaningful because this will be one of the key actors in research and development in Europe when it comes to spending. So that's security and defense. And the second issue is the economic relationship. I think we do have to recalibrate it, but recalibrate it from both sides. I mean, there are the US problems with European trade surplus, but there are also our deep-seated problems with the US prominence in the digital economy, for example. That was very vivid also in the years of the Obama administration, and it's something that will be on the agenda for years to come. And the third is how we adapt the multilateral institutions. And there, of course, the reform of the WTO is very high on the European agenda, as it should be, because it is one of the huge success stories of the multilateral system, except that it doesn't work as effectively as we would like. There are things get stuck in the arbitration process, the dispute settlement process doesn't work as well as it should. And of course, President Trump does make this point, but his answer is to turn the table. I mean, our answer is not to turn the table, but to improve the way things work. So maybe to conclude at this stage, I would say that yes, the current moment is both a blessing, is both a curse and a blessing. The curse part, I think we know all about it. The blessing part is to endorse what President Macron referred to when he spoke about European sovereignty. I think that is an extremely potent concept because it's not defensive, it's not protective, it's also about empowering, it's also about giving ourselves more confidence in what we can achieve. And I think that is extremely important at this juncture.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I think we'll come back to these strategic aspirations. We have already one question to that, and we'll come back to that. Jana, it seems to me that everything which comes from Washington plays on the strings quite sensitive in Germany, and so it actually could fuel the anti-American emotion, and not just the popular one, but also among policymakers. So how is the situation in Germany in that? And you mentioned stock exchange. I think you're right that the proportion of the trade with the goods which are the increased tariffs is low, but the economy is globalized, and we've already seen the impact of the tariffs imposed on China on companies in Europe. And so it affects German economy mostly. So it's not just a punch got from Washington, but we get another punch from Beijing by the markets. So how would you react to these two questions? The fueling of, unfortunately, traditional anti-American feeling, which was still somewhere in Germany as a juxtaposition to the traditional transatlantic tie, and the second one, which is a secondary influences of the US steps on the global trade scene. Jana.
Well, thank you for the question. I wanted to start with Germany anyway, because the question of the panel was kind of EU-US relations. But to me, EU-US relations is very much defined by the member states of the European Union and their individual bonds with the United States. And I experience a huge difference throughout the European Union and Europe when it comes to reading the Trump administrations and implications for the various countries. There are much more positive takes in some countries and much more negative ones in others, which makes it very hard, I think, to come up with a joint European approach. So I give you a German perspective, because for us Germans, the election of Donald Trump was a particularly rude awakening. You have to imagine that we came from kind of a honeymoon period under the last years of the Obama presidency, where Angela Merkel was called Obama's closest international ally. So we had experienced a very good cooperation, intensive cooperation, and then the Trump election happened, and it was immediately shaking one of the cornerstones of German foreign policy, transatlantic relations, and also kind of German identity is very much based on transatlantic relations. And Germany was also hit particularly hard because we were in such a very cozy situation before. I mean, the US security shield allowed Germany for years and years to prosper, to spend little on defense, and to build up a vast welfare system, good health care, and to create this well-protected and prospering export industry. So I think there is actually some truth when Donald Trump accuses Germany of free riding, and Germany particularly so in Europe. So, but under Trump, the climate really immediately changed a lot, and you already had this during the election campaign when Trump compared Hillary Clinton to Angela Merkel and said that Hillary tries to become the United States, Angela Merkel destroying the country by taking all these migrants. And from Berlin, where I sit, the situation is really crucial, because in every single basket that Trump addresses, Germany is in the bad ally camp. Be it security with defense spending, be it trade, be it migration. I don't know if you have seen the tweet from, I think yesterday or the day before yesterday, where Trump kind of attacked Angela Merkel again for her migration policy in a period where the coalition in Berlin is very shaky. So, be it the Iran deal, be it climate change. So Merkel in one camp, Trump in the other camp. And this is not only on issues, but it's the overall philosophy which is very different. So the German Chancellor champions globalization, multilateral institutions, and to some extent open borders, although Germany has changed its migration policy completely since 2015. It's very tough now. So, and Trump believes in not globalization, but globalism, seen as something negative in a zero-sum game, where the US is losing, and the US is, I quote Trump, a piggy bank that everybody is robbing. So Trump focuses not on multilateral institutions, but on bilateral relations and America first. So this is a very difficult situation for Germany, but Germany is not totally innocent, because actually a lot of things it gets accused, it's actually guilty of. So where are we in the debate in Germany? What follows from this? We have a lot of speeches. Angela Merkel last year gave a famous speech about that the EU could no longer fully rely on the United States. We had Heiko Maas recently giving a big speech. We had Sigmar Gabriel, our former foreign minister, before. So we had all these speeches and declarations about Europe, which has to do more. But seen from Germany, and seen not from the government position, but from an expert position, I can say that there is nothing really has happened, because for us, Germans, this is a really difficult situation, and I think helplessness would describe the situation in Berlin. Most people think this is structural and not only an exception. Most people think it started already under Obama, with nation building at home, pivot to Asia, leading from behind in Libya, and all that. But of course, Trump is unprecedented in many ways, in the way he treats allies, this disregard for their security concerns and all that. So Germany, and I end with this, has basically chose the path of compartmentalization. And this is a strategy Germany uses also when it comes to dealing with Russia or China. It's like dealing with the United States in separate baskets. On trade, we can have disputes. On climate change, we can have disputes, but in NATO, we have great cooperation. And I think there is a huge danger, and it has already proven that this is very difficult because compartmentalization does not work very well with a president who mixes up all the topics all the time. So to me, it's totally clear that Europe must do more, and that the speeches by our political elite have to be underlined with real measures and action. And I think here I see Germany being in a very prominent role, and Germany that needs to deliver also on the economy. I think, as I said, Germany was allowed to prosper, and I think there is justified criticism from the United States, and Germany has to do more, particularly when it comes to security and defense spending. I totally agree with you. But I think there is no solution from a German perspective to not cutting ties with the United States, totally not, but to prepare ourselves better and to become a more powerful player as a European Union, because this is the alternative Germany chooses, to put a lot of weight on the European Union now.
Isn't it partly psychological? Because, as you acknowledged, it's not a sea change of position, at least in some areas, especially defense spending. I remember Secretary Gates was quite open, and he was practically saying the same thing, but the tone was different, and, but the message was the same. And so we shouldn't be surprised on that particular avenue. So isn't this, as you said, there is no chemistry between Chancellor and President, but I know the chemistry matters in politics, but is it really all what matters?
No, I don't think it's all that matters, but I think when there was criticism from Obama or the previous administrations, it was always perceived as criticism coming from a friend, and now we are not sure about the friendliness of our transatlantic partner anymore, and I think this makes a huge difference. And Germany is really, I mean, if you follow Donald Trump's tweets and all that, is really singled out within the European Union. And whereas, but I also think it's chemistry and it's personal. And Germany, or Merkel, definitely has not found a right way of dealing with Trump. Macron, for example, this is kind of a masterpiece of kind of how to deal. He didn't achieve much more than Merkel in the end, but I think in terms of chemistry and also preparing for the days after Trump, he does much better than my chancellor.
Thank you. Petko, what is your take? I understand you have an official statement written here, but
forget about it.
And you're in an official position, so I understand that it's not easy to separate the personal and official position. What is your feeling from what's happening in recent years since the new American administration has taken over? How do you see this change in practice, in day-to-day life of diplomats and politicians? And how do you see it from your particular place, which is Bulgaria, a strategic place close to not only to East, but also to Middle East, both areas quite hot areas in recent years in foreign policy. The floor is yours.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I was interested to see there's a question going on whether recent developments between the EU and US will influence our security cooperation. I think this remains a critical issue, especially for us. I see the no says 33%, not very optimistic. But, and I think Jana spoke correctly about relations between the leaders, and sometimes we need to remember that these relations need to be depersonalized. At the end of the day, nothing substantive has changed. The transatlantic relations are based on shared values, on the commitment to democracy, to a rules-based world, and to ensuring security for our citizens. And we have been depending on each other on both sides of the Atlantic for security and for cooperation. And I don't think Europeans need to be approaching this with any level of complex. Let's not forget we're the biggest market, 500 million people. We have the largest GDP, over 15 trillion. Recent developments are, of course, I would say unwelcome. In my narrow office, that means a lot more work and a lot more late hours. But I think in the wider aspect, it means, and I think Paweł spoke about this, we have to look at renewal. As far as security is concerned, and I agree with you, the issue about defense spending is not new. And we know about this, and we've been trying to tackle the problem. In my country, we now have a plan that we will raise defense spending up to 2% before 2024, and I think many European countries are having similar plans, and I think it's a positive thing. We see that for various reasons we live in a more uncertain world, and our democracies are attacked in hybrid ways, and we need to defend. We need to take measures, and here again the transatlantic relation remains crucial. I think Trump or whoever it is, Macron, Merkel, I don't think the persons are that important. I think the values that we share, the common interests that we have in a rules-based world, and yes, the economic contentious issues do matter, but we have the framework, the multilateral system that can take care of this. We have the World Trade Organization, and so far nothing that has been done has gone beyond the rules that we have established in the WTO. So we should try and use whatever we have at our disposal to work at our relations. If it doesn't help, if it doesn't work, then we should look at renewing the system. But not before we have made sure we exhausted all the means that we have at our disposal, and we do have a lot of means at our disposal. I think globally there's a basic problem, and much too often we seem to avoid talking about this. And I find that this is the underlying reason for a lot of the populist movements that are on the rise. And this is growing inequality, both between states but also within states. And so when it comes to domestic policy, nothing better to attack somebody like Merkel to make you more popular. it's always, you know, it's an old trick in domestic policy. Exteriorize the problem, focus on a foreign, outside figure or person or country to avoid talking about the problems at home. And let's not forget, the United States is a country where 1 in 7 is below the poverty line, and that also obviously is important, and that's why the new president in the US wants to take measures to do something about those people. So bottom line is, let's not panic. Let's go back to basics and work on our relations with the US, because it's the most precious thing we have since World War II. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll come back to the question of, are we still in the rules-based international system? Because the question is, what would happen if somebody will actually ask the WTO to make judgments on this, and what would be, and whether this would be accepted as a judgment. We'll see. This is not. This is just a theoretical question, but we shouldn't forget that WTO actually didn't fulfill the expectations, and that's why all these negotiations, the TTIP and the Trans-Pacific Partnership were launched, because if we would believe that we can actually promote free trade through WTO, we wouldn't go for these agreements. Now it seems to be that we are even a step below that, not global WTO, not I would say bloc agreements, TTIP and TPP, but the bilateral agreements are the last chance, and we've seen already a question related to it. Can we actually compensate for these developments between United States and America by promoting free trade with other areas and countries like Canada, Mexico is mentioned here? Well, I'd like the panel to come back to this, because this is an interesting question. You remember how easy it was to block CETA with Canada, and are we really in the same mood in Europe that all the countries will happily accept the free trade agreements with other, no matter with who the partner is? I have some doubts that there is enthusiasm for free trade in Europe, public opinion. Anyway, this is just a segue to the Greek point of view, I guess. Vassilis, what's your comment on all this? Is it permanent, or is it just the aberration? And are we to perform a strategic patience, or is it just a first step towards the autonomy, strategic autonomy of Europe? And are we able of it? That's another question. Please, floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Just to clarify, I'm not going to be wearing my Greek hat today, more my progressive hat. I'm based in Brussels, so I just happen to be a Greek in Brussels. But thank you very much, and also thanks to the organizers for inviting me. I'm going to start off by saying that I had the unenviable task of moderating the previous two discussions last year and the year before at the Prague summit on transatlantic. And I would say that the discussion we had in 2016 was obviously very different to the discussion which preceded the election, was very different to the discussion we had last year. And I think the discussion we had last year is very different to the discussion we're having today. What I'm trying to say by this is that this 500 or so days of Trump in the office, and more so when we first tackled the topic of the transatlantic relationship before the election, has been a really sobering experience. Nobody can deny that, and I think we can all agree to. Sobering not only because it's sad, it's inconvenient, it's awkward, but also because it has many lessons there. It involves us having a harder look at ourselves and the transatlantic relationship. I would say that there are 4 specific, very concrete lessons we can get out of this experience. I'm going to try and be brief. The first one is that everything that is happening shouldn't be happening. Everything that has happened in a way that nobody expected to happen, or it shouldn't have happened that way. I think President Trump's erratic performance during the G7 summit in Canada was a very good indication of that. His withdrawal of his assent of a joint communique via Twitter afterwards. I think the tweets that we saw addressed towards Germany of the last couple of days were also highly illustrative of that. I think we saw Trump attacking, disparaging a NATO ally, going against the elected government of that country, abetting all those centrifugal forces within the country, the populist forces, and not on the basis of facts, on the basis of no facts, no data, no statistics. And instead of withdrawing after the initial backlash, we saw him doubling and tripling down on his falsehood, which I like the Washington Post's way of characterizing it, which is a for Pinocchio falsehood. You know. What I'm trying to say by this is that this is not, we shouldn't be overreacting to each and every example, but we should treat this as a continuum. We should treat this as a series of examples, highly indicative examples, that prove a specific point. And that point is that Trump is who he is. He's not going to change. And if you can borrow through the insanity, if you can skip past the diplomatic decorum, if we can move past the errativeness, what remains is that Trump is erratic. He's powered by a very strong drive to erase his predecessor's legacy. He's fueled, his actions and his words are fueled too often not by real intelligence, but by snippets of facts. Perhaps the last person he spoke to, a discussion he just had, Fox and Friends, Hannity, whatever. And his words and actions can only be described as knee-jerkism at its most incoherent. How can we work with this person? Second point I wanted to make is that after 5 or so 100 days in on the job, nobody should act surprised. I don't think we have that luxury. I don't think Europe can afford having that luxury. And I think that also applies to Mr. Trump's enablers or defenders within the EU, who just, in my opinion, need to stop pretending otherwise. Mr. Trump may have a very elastic record when it comes to domestic politics, and we've seen how many promises he's broken compared to his pre-election agenda, although we've seen an intensification of his determination to push forward with this very regressive agenda domestically, especially in the last few days. Perhaps because he's more unshackled than at any other point in his presidency. But when it comes to the foreign policy agenda, and this is what concerns us primarily, we've seen that he hasn't veered too much away from his America First agenda. And again, if you skip past all the style or the temperament, which for me is not very important, because I think what is important is not his style, it's the regressive agenda he serves to promote and to advance, however incoherently. So if you just scrub off all that veneer, what remains is his deep disdain towards multilateralism, his contempt towards the rules-based order, his heavy reliance on this strongman mentality, which he absolutely adores, and his quid pro quo logic. This is a strong transnational logic that characterizes much of what he does. And the extent of how this combination, this belief nucleus, translates into policy pronouncement changes from day to day, and we shouldn't overreact on that basis, but this belief system trickles down in every tweet, in every ingratiating comment, in every petty fight he pulls either on Twitter or in real life. Third point I wanted to make is that not every word of Mr. Trump needs to be parsed for meaning. I think this is clear, but there are certain things we can now see that they are clear in his behavior. And it's things that he responds well to. And this is clearly not alliances, this is clearly not established norms or practices or decorum, but he responds well to strength, to pomp, and to fierce resistance. And this is another lesson we need to keep from this experience. Perhaps the Iran deal is indicative in that sense, because what we saw in the run-up to the May 12th deadline, before Mr. Trump announced that he's withdrawing the US from the deal, was indicative of how slippery a slope it is when we try to offer concessions to somebody who just doesn't understand, doesn't see negotiations in that specific way. I can come back to that, because I think it's a very important point. I'm running out of time. And the fourth element, and I'm going to come back to the initial question, and this is very important for Europe, is that it is this combination that shows that this is not normal. This is not just atypical behavior to an extent of which every political leader is entitled to, you know. This might be temporary, but we saw also in the aftermath of the Iraq war that these policies, when implemented, they have real consequences that cannot just be restored if another more pro-Atlanticist administration comes and restores the immediate damage. There are real long-term consequences that we have to be dealing with in the long term. So following Trump's 15 or so months in the office, in the White House, and seeing his confrontational stance vis-à-vis Europe, his support towards people like Nigel Farage, his initial non-commitment to NATO's Article 5, his withdrawal from the Paris Agreement, his withdrawal from the Iran Agreement, his trade tariffs. It's not just each component can lead to an overreaction, but taken all together, I think we just need to stop being complacent about it. So I would say this is a very inconvenient truth that we have to face and own up to, but we have to face it. Europe risks losing out if it doesn't stick together, and this is my point. So just coming back to Martin's question on Slido, I would say we need to move towards strategic autonomy. We know that Europe is a very time-consuming exercise, so it's not going to happen overnight, but we need to move towards that direction. And if I might say, moving towards that direction will allow us the luxury of being more strategically patient towards the US, whichever administration comes later on.
Let's stay for a while on this level. No matter whether it is because we like to please our ally, or it is because we just going to do it on our own, it narrows down to the homework. Yeah. So let's forget about the United States for a moment, and let's speak about, are we ready for the homework, for the challenges which are ahead of us? And that's our task in this panel. If strategic autonomy means really strategic, then there was, I think, a good disclaimer. I mean, in nuclear, we're not there. We're not there. We are in far from there after Brexit. And and I've heard voices from Germany that Germany is not ready to take a strategic lead. And Germany is not even ready to back the strategic vision of Macron. So how can we talk about strategic autonomy if the two leading countries are not able to agree what strategic autonomy means? Paweł mentioned, yes, the intervention force, but we shouldn't, you mentioned Libya. It was Europe started Libya intervention, and Germany was against it. and because of legal consequences. I mean, let's take it as an example. I mean, we are not living in an abstract world. There will be other Libyas ahead of us. And is Germany and France able to agree on the parameters of the intervention? There's a first question. And second questions are, is the rest of EU able to follow? And this is just the security field. So my argument, we've heard shared values, and then this is not temporary, this is permanent. We have to prepare for you know, the scissors going in different directions. I'd like you to comment on this, because I think this is fundamental assumption for other behavior. Who will start? Vassilis?
Yeah, just very quickly, because I'm neither German nor French, and I can't claim I'm an expert on either, but I think going back to the negotiations that were conducted, especially in the last diplomatic sprint when it comes to the Iran deal, it's a very indicative lesson there. I think what we saw was President Macron going to Washington, just trying to capitalize on his personal chemistry with Mr. Trump, because there's a lot of pomp involved there. And we saw that this didn't work out in the end. What we saw instead was, during the press conference, President Macron announcing out of the blue that perhaps we can add a new deal to the JCPOA, to the Iran nuclear deal. Many people were taken aback by that. Certainly, from a Brussels perspective, I know many people were surprised by that. I don't think many people in Berlin were not surprised by that. I think the initial reaction, especially by the Foreign Ministry and to a lesser extent by Chancellor Merkel, indicated that this was not coordinated at all. And then we saw the visit of Chancellor Merkel, where she tried to, you know, not enjoying the personal chemistry with Mr. Trump. She tried her best to convince him to stay in the deal. And I'm going to come back to the point about the slippery slope. What we saw there was a fragmentation of EU unity on the topic. What we saw was buying into Mr. Trump's preference for bilateral instead of multilateral. And we saw it didn't work in the end. I think there's a crucial lesson to be learned there, that if we engage in this action, and we saw this, Mr. Trump engaged in this sort of back and forth, he relished in that. And in the end, what did we get out of it? A US position where essentially the only acceptable solution for Washington would have been if the EU would have joined the US in walking away from the agreement, which was unacceptable for Europe. So I would say that strategic autonomy might be a dream, full-on strategic autonomy. I don't think we have the capacity or the full willingness or the political will or the unity, at least to an appropriate sufficient extent and level, to achieve that. But there are so many steps we can take in between. And I would let others, perhaps more experts, to discuss trade or defense, but I would say that let's not buy into this transactional point of view. Let's preserve our unity. Let's preserve and enhance the capacity, for example, of Federica Mogherini to negotiate on things like that. Let's keep this in mind when we go forward. And I would say that this is in the long-term interest of each individual member state, including France, including Germany, because we need to be more cognizant of the diplomatic, of the economic, and perhaps the defense gravitas and weight Europe can exert. And if we don't realize it ourselves, and Mr. Trump is a wake-up call when it comes to that, because if this doesn't do the trick, one wonders what might. I think it will be a self-inflicted wound.
You basically addressed the question, the challenge which was there in that anonymous question: will the conflict with the US make EU more united or more divided? And also partly the Iranian deal, which will come back to that. Advantage of Slido, answering more questions in one. Jana.
Yeah, I want to answer this question and also comment on what you said. In an ideal world, I think you're totally right, and this should be a wake-up call for Europe to rally against, behind the EU flag and to unite and to make Europe stronger. But I think, coming back to your question, are we ready for the homework? Are we ready to aiming at strategic autonomy, not looking at the United States, but doing it for ourselves? I think you cannot answer the question only looking at Europe, because so many of the European countries are looking first and foremost to the United States. And we are a perfect example of this, my statement and your statement, because I think I would totally contradict you. You said nothing substantial has changed. From my perspective, everything has changed. Maybe it did not start under Trump, but already under Obama. But with the Trump administration, some things really have changed. And I think the US is giving up its role of the traditional global hegemon. You talked about values. I think Trump just distanced himself from the liberal international order, from this term. I think when you look at the Warsaw speech Trump gave, you see a very one-sided interpretation of the values we share. This is not like, the West is based on a geopolitical entity and not on values, and all the values of religion and faith. And so this is, I think, not the old story we are hearing. And in the American society, there is no permissive consensus on globalization and the American role anymore. So we see something new, and we have to react. And you said we have to be careful to renew the system, and I would argue we have no alternative to renewing the system. And then basically in Europe, there are two answers to that, how to renew the system. I think the first answer is transatlanticism based on Trumpism, and these are some countries who kind of buy American weapons, for example, because they think that strengthens their bilateral ties with the United States. Take Sweden or Finland. They're not members of NATO. They buy American systems because they see that as an additional security guarantee. There are some countries much more ready to defend the decision on Iran, not the big three, but other countries much more sympathetic. So there is this model, transatlanticism, but based on Trumpism. And another model kind of spearheaded by France, strategic autonomy, but in a way that is not very comfortable for a lot of other European countries. And I think we definitely have to find something that unites us all as Europeans, and this is the big challenge, and this is so difficult. And I think it totally doesn't help if we do this in baskets, like, I don't know, talk about EU defense and all the great initiatives, and talk about the EII Macron's initiative as something that is contradicting this. But I think if we really want to make a European effort, we should think about everything that unites us, and we should also be aware that there is a big difference in the reading of the Trump administration and the implications, and we have to find really common ground and kind of. And this is, I think, the big challenge. But it doesn't help us, I think, to discuss this only in different kind of blocks or columns, like European Intervention Initiative or PESCO or.
Petko,
Yeah.
you'd like to react?
Yeah, sure. What I meant to say is that we should look at the system and not the person. Again, we've been talking too much about a single person. And since we're talking about him, he has the lowest ratings of any American president in history. Even though it's growing, it's still the lowest. Let's not forget that due to the specifics of the system, he was elected by a lesser number of people than his opponent got. So when I say nothing basic has changed, is the commitment to democracy. I don't know that he has said he's against it, or that the American people has said they're against the values of democracy. True, today the US announced they're leaving the Human Rights Council. That's really a pity. But that doesn't mean we have to dissolve the Council. And that's what I wanted to say. We have a multilateral system, and we have to use it. If we go after that, we dismantle the World Trade Organization, then what? Obviously, bilateral deals, as some will call them, are better for a large and strong country, because then you negotiate from the position of strength. And so the answer to the question, will the conflict with the EU, I wouldn't say it's a conflict, the US make the EU more united? I hope so. I hope so, because then, as I said, the EU is a strength. The EU is the strongest entity in this world. And if we stand united, we'll be strong. And then we'll be able to get good deals, to use the terminology. But, I think we have a vested interest to defend multilateralism and the basic values that have always guided transatlantic relations. I think they still are there, regardless of who the president is.
But what makes you think that the American next president is going to support this multilateral international system again, which the current president obviously undermines on every single occasion? I don't share your hope. I wish it was true, really, but I'm just less hopeful.
Well, what's the alternative? I think we've seen it last century with the League of the Nations. It didn't work. We decided to dismantle it, and then what?
Yeah. Paweł, there are two meanings, or various meanings, of strategic autonomy, and one is, I mean, in terms of strategic weapons, strategic security, but there's another one, and this is, are we really the biggest influencer on shaping the multilateral order? Isn't China the bigger market? And isn't China a bigger influencer? I mean, you've seen it, Copenhagen. I think we were not shapers, and it was in good old days, you know, with Obama pushing for, you know, climate change, multilateral solution, and still China was the kingmaker of the deal. So we are probably losing this kind of strategic influence anyway, and aren't we just, you know, fooling ourselves when having this idea that we will be able to play a global role as European Union after this and after Brexit? Shouldn't we apply more modest posture, which is more realistic to what we can deliver? So what's your take on this?
Yeah, I love your questions, Jiří, and I think this one gets to the heart of things as well, because I think a lot of what we have discussed is a bit of a distraction from the real issue in today's world, which is a great power shift. And it's a great power shift away from the West and more towards the East. And it's not overnight that this is happening, it's more gradual and extended in time. But if we are now going to, you know, get totally absorbed by the skirmish with the United States, we will risk losing sight of the real game which is happening. And I think that real game is that China is building its own world order, because what is happening is that China is putting forward a proposition which is, to many intents and purposes, alternative to the Western-born world order. So the One Belt, One Road initiative is meant to be the spine of that new world order. And if we become too self-absorbed with regards to tariffs on steel and aluminum and what have you, and bourbon, now we risk a little bit not seeing that broader picture. And it is for real that this is happening. And actually, Trump, one could say, is a reaction on the part of the United States to that great power shift, which is happening. So I think what our answer should be is to build on our multilateral credentials, because that's our best asset, and we are doing that by pursuing trade agreements with new countries, just opened with Australia and New Zealand. Mercosur is going on. Japan is closed, and it's pretty huge, pretty big. So this is all happening. But I think the real test of our skills will be whether the institutions which have been created are well adapted to this new world, if they are sufficiently inclusive to also address the problems which the emerging countries are bringing in. So when you look at the WTO has actually been more a platform for advanced economies rather than for emerging. If you look at the number of cases that have been brought to the dispute settlement system, it's largely the advanced countries that have been using this instrument rather than the emerging economies. And there are good reasons to press very actively for the reform of WTO, because things take time. It's from 6 to 12 months before a case begins to be handled in a WTO dispute settlement. So how possibly in today's economy, which is extremely rapid, can you expect that this will be satisfactory? So it's this type of issues that we need to address, namely how do we advance, modernize, refresh multilateralism, of which we are an integral part, and we are in fact the heart of that particular system. I mean, Europe is multilateralism. It's the external expression of our very nature. So I think we will always stand by multilateralism. That has to be said. But it has to be modernized. It has to be reinvented so as to address also the needs of others in the global system.
Paweł, is it your answer to this third question, what should EU do to be better in negotiations with US but also with others?
Yeah. Well, I think we have to avoid being ideological about this skirmish with the US, as I would call it. I mean, up until 1st of June, we were prepared to talk about a small trade agreement. If Trump did not impose the tariffs on steel and aluminum, we were prepared, in spite of everything, in spite of the fact that we would have preferred to do TTIP, something big and modern and forward-looking. I mean, TTIP had the advantage of being a new generation trade agreement because it involved the convergence of regulatory standards, which is about what today's economy is all about. That is off the table, but we were prepared to talk about a small trade agreement if Trump did not introduce these tariffs. But our basic principle is that we cannot talk with a gun stuck to our heads, and I think this is where we find ourselves. Therefore, I think we should be pragmatic. Of course, we have our values and we stand by them. But getting ideological about it, I think, is not the answer. Also, we should avoid being black and white about Trump. I don't know if you read Secretary General Stoltenberg's op-ed yesterday, but there's this very telling emphasis. I mean, it's very stark. He really it's a call to arms on his behalf. But he also says that the Trump administration has actually increased spending on U.S. presence in Europe since coming to power by 40%. Yeah. So it is not black and white. I mean, we should avoid being emotional about things, but look at the facts and figures. Be firm, but also hold back our emotions.
Mm. Yeah. Can we have this poll again? Because I'd like to come back to the poll. Could you switch the poll to the screen? Yes. And Vassilis,
no, I just want to say that we shouldn't confuse emotion with ambition. No. Reacting to Trump as Trump doesn't mean that we should dismantle the transatlantic ties. They run much deeper and they're much more profound than a temperament of a person, you know. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't stand up to him. This is a completely different exercise. And standing up to him doesn't mean giving credence to all the alarmist voices of doom and gloom that say, oh my God, the transatlantic relationship is gone, we should become full-on autonomous. This is highly unrealistic. It cannot happen under the circumstances, even if the EU was a fully functional, smooth working multilateral institution, which is not. And we're still deep in the throes of an identity crisis, you know. But it means taking meaningful steps to preserve the very foundational elements of the transatlantic relationship, even if that means standing up to the current administration.
And,
so,
and I think it also means reducing vulnerability, because, I mean, we have been profiting as Europe very much from this Pax Americana after 45. I mean, not only Germany has spent little on defense, has developed a welfare system, has an export economy. So I think we are very vulnerable, and
exactly.
we feel that these days, that we are exposed because we did not prepare for such a situation. And I think we have to reduce vulnerability, at least in terms of security,
exactly,
in terms of trade dependence. And that is not cutting ties with the US, but being stronger in order also to be a better partner and ally for any future US administration.
And just a last point on this, we cannot be this kind of a power, this kind of an actor in all the battles we're going to wage. So we need to pick very strategically what it is that we focus on. And for me, the Iran deal is one of those battles. We need to fight consistently with unity and coherence. We shouldn't, for example, sacrifice our efforts to salvage the deal, because if we do that, if we don't do that, it means exemption from tariffs. We need to be more strategic than that. And I'm mentioning the Iran deal because I don't think it's emblematic only of what the EU has to gain from it because it's a multilateral agreement and because we believe in multilateralism, because it's in our DNA, but because we are exposed to many dangers, much more than the US, if the Iran deal collapses. This is emblematic and just illustrative of what the EU needs to do to defend not only its interests, its values, but its security and above all its integrity. Because if you could pick one foreign policy accomplishment of the EU, I would say that the Iran deal is the best out of what we've achieved in the last few years.
I agree with you that probably we should try to uphold the deal, but are we able to do it?
That's an entirely different question.
Imagine that all those economic entities and companies who actually started to deal with Iran and with Iranian economy will be a subject of secondary sanctions imposed by the United States. They will think twice about increasing their share and their entrepreneurial ideas on the Iranian market. So, I mean, in principle, I agree with you, but in practice, I think they will look at what will be the impact on their other businesses, because we are all global. There was a question whether this conflict with the US in economic field will hamper the security relations. Well, I would say that we'll see at the NATO summit. And based on what Paweł said, imagine the American president will come there and say, we've increased 40% spending on our presence in Europe. So tell me, Germany, Poland, how you've contributed to that. Because, I mean, in the same logic, you may criticize the logic, but I mean, he has all the arguments. He has all the trump cards in his hand. Because tell me which country in Europe has increased by 40%? None. And so, I mean, I can imagine that he'll say, okay, do you have an answer? I'll come back when you actually do your homework. And then we'll have a serious crisis in NATO. So are we ready to actually to do our homework? Because not because Trump is going to test us whether we've increased, but we are doing it for ourselves, as you said, because it's our own interest to invest in our defense. I'd like to open the floor to the questions. Are there mics available, please? Is there anyone with a mic? Where are the mics? Okay, the gentleman here, and then the lady over there, and then the gentleman over there. 3 questions, and then we'll answer.
Yeah,
please introduce yourself.
Yes, my name is Moni. I'm a professor of European integration at Brussels University. A couple of issues referring to the European defense policy and this American request to increase European expenditure, military expenditure. All European budgets are under major strain, and the European Union is insisting for a reduction of deficit and for the implementation of austerity plans under the Maastricht Treaty and the Lisbon Treaty. We are also taking a number of additional commitments. 30% of European spending should go to climate change, 3% of European spending should go to research and development, 2% of European spending is going to other issues, and 0.7% is expected to go to the official development assistance. In addition, we have additional money needed for migration, additional money needed for social Europe, and additional money needed to recreate the conditions for growth, competitiveness, and jobs in Europe. Now, how this additional European military spending fits with this scenario? First point. Second issue. 80–85% of current European military expenditure goes for running costs, salaries, pensions, and remunerations of military personnel, and also paying for very expensive operations overseas. Now, very little is going to weapons, very little is going to new armaments. I suspect that if President Trump insists for Europe to increase military spending, I suspect that he is thinking that Europe should import more American weapons, American hardware, which is very expensive. By the way, we are importing F-35 planes, for which there is a little use in Europe and which are very expensive machines. So I suspect that there is this kind of objective from the American perspective. In addition, there is a very little appetite for European industry, military industry, defense industry, to be open to other European companies, let's say. And there are military procurement markets are very closed. I don't see any, let's say, weapon produced abroad. I don't see it in Germany. The German procurement market is totally closed and confined to the German military industry only. So this is another issue which we need to think about. Then the major issue, overarching issue, is who are our enemies? Europe has not been created, has not been conceived to have enemies in the world. We are an open organization, a cooperative organization, open to the world and entertaining constructive engagements and constructive dialogues with all the countries in the world, including Cuba, including Russia, before it was the Soviet Union, including China under the Communist Party, including North Korea, including Burma, including all the nasty countries that you may consider. Now, who are our enemies today? Why do we need to expand our military budget? If the enemy is terrorism, we need to focus on domestic security matters, domestic security approach, and we need particular types of prevention, particular types of instruments to control the risk of terrorism. I don't see Russia as a major threat. Europe as such should not see Russia as a major threat. Europe in terms of European Union. Maybe NATO. NATO is something different. NATO is a military, defensive military organization. By the way, we have signed an agreement with NATO, very difficult to implement, because in NATO you have Turkey, in NATO you have neutral, you have some member states, some countries which are not member states, and in the European Union you have also countries which are not members of NATO.
Thank you very much. I'd like to give the floor to others. So I think you made your point clearly.
Yeah, these are the issues, and I would like to have your comments on some of these issues.
Thank you very much. The lady over there, and then gentleman standing.
Thank you. My name is Sonja Lokar. I come from Slovenia. I'm an expert on gender equality issues. I cannot agree more with my predecessor speaker, and I would like to add two other things to this. When we are talking about the necessity of free trade all over the globe, which is a very good concept, we have to ask ourselves what should not be on the market. And what I understood from the opposition of women mostly against these free trade agreements was the opposition to trade on health, on education, on care for elderly and for the children. These cannot be on the market, because if it is on the market, we do not have any more people who get their needs cared for, but we have profit, which is the main point why this is done. And this is against the main point, and you started with this, why we have these problems in the world now, because the inequalities are becoming really too big, within the countries, between the countries. And the race for the bigger armament between the superpowers, which are not only one anymore, will not help this. And this will not keep the peace in the world. Thank you.
Thank you. These were statements. The gentleman over there. Yeah, the one standing. Yeah.
Very briefly, this was not my question, but I think it's very provocative. So it's at the top of the screen. Should the EU propose any extension of trade relations with Mexico and Canada as an answer to Trump's newly imposed tariffs on European goods? The Mexican Commissioner for Trade and Investment is going to be here in Prague in just a few days talking on this very issue. So I'm very curious, in light of the panel's expertise, if that top question, although not mine, I think it's very productive. Thank you.
Okay. I think Paweł has touched that question a little bit, but you didn't answer specifically extending existing treaties with Canada and Mexico. So I'd like you to answer, and also others. But then I give you a final word to react to also what we've heard from the audience. So Paweł, would you start?
Okay, thank you so much. So with Canada, we have the CETA agreement, which is state-of-the-art trade and investment agreement, which is provisionally applied because the ratification process is still ongoing, and I think we already see huge benefits from that trade agreement, which is a deep and comprehensive one, so it goes deep into the regulatory field. So my answer would be that this is a hugely progressive, forward-looking agreement already. And we need to give it time to prove its benefits. First of all, we are discussing with Mexico the modernization of the trade agreement. So this is also on the table. And we just opened the trade talks with Australia and New Zealand. Usually about the figures, the good news is that there is one European member state that has increased by more than 40%, and that's Romania, 50% increase in defense spending 2016, 2017, followed by, these are CIPRI figures, by Lithuania 21% and Latvia 21%. So some of the EU countries are doing fine, but others less so. France had a decrease by 1.9%. defense, again in the same period, and we definitely need to do more. I mean, to your question, I would answer that we first of all need to avoid duplication, because duplication is the biggest waste of resources taking place in Europe right now, namely that we basically all have our different airplanes, different combat vehicles. They all follow their own standards, and that is a massive waste of resources. So we need joint capability development. And the Franco-German meeting yesterday, I'm sure you've seen, has proposed a joint combat and aerial capability development. So things are gradually moving, but of course in defense it all takes an awfully long time. To develop a project could be up to 20 years to see the actual product in the battlefield. So we need to act quite urgently. Who are our enemies? Well, we just had the annexation of Crimea a few years ago. It does need to influence our thinking. But the NATO summit in a couple of weeks' time will deal with hybrid threats and will deal with terrorism. These are more sort of universal challenges to our security, because we are under cyber threat from many directions. So we are not really singling out the enemy. We should be preparing in a functional way for the threats of the future. And maybe finally on inequalities and the social issues, I mean, inequalities in the world have become more limited at the expense of inequalities inside some of our countries. Actually, not so much in Europe. If you take Western and Central Europe together, it's the courtesy of Central Europe mostly where inequalities are shrinking, that Europe as a whole has a falling inequalities rate, but in Western Europe inequalities are actually growing, so it is a problem. And our trade agreements aim to address the social issues, sustainability issues. The problem is that not all of our partners, of course, are willing and able sometimes to embark on that conversation because they see it as a sign of protectionism from our side, which is wrong, because what we want to do is to project a certain set of values, and I think we will be quite persistent in doing that.
Thank you, Paweł. Jana?
Well, I use this for some final comments. I think what we should do is kind of hope for the best still, because it is obvious that we will remain dependent on the United States for the foreseeable future, and we can only hope that everybody who predicts kind of a sea change and is wrong. So, but prepare for the worst, because I think this change is more structural than we might think today. And how should we prepare for the worst? I think first, by defining what we are aiming at, defining strategic autonomy. I mean, all the EU countries subscribe to that in the global strategy, but everybody has a totally different understanding. Some even openly oppose this term. So define what is it, what all EU, and not only EU, but European states want to be, what kind of actor in the world. And then talk about European defense. I'm a defense person, not a trade person, so I talk about defense, and I think here I already tried to make this point. It doesn't make any sense to focus only on the EU or only on coalitions of the willing outside the EU, so I think it's really time for all hands on board. So I think the yesterday's declaration is a first step, because Germany with the EU focus and France with the EII, I think there seems to be a tendency to get closer together, and I think this is the way forward, to make them mutually beneficial, these initiatives, and not to make them weaken each other. So I think it's about the UK. We haven't talked about the UK, but it's about making Brexit not a catastrophe in defense and security. That's why I like the EII initiative, because it keeps the UK on board. So, but to really think not in baskets, but to think about European defense as something like we have to do it anyway, despite of the next American president. And I think we should also think creatively about keeping ties with the United States, maybe not with Trump in the White House so much. I mean, we should do that, but should use all other channels and sources and cities and states and civil actors and everything that helps us, and to take the criticism coming from the United States seriously, or to distinguish what is like kind of justified and what is not, but there is a lot of criticism also justified, as I said in my initial remarks. I mean, we are lacking behind, we were free riding, and we have to get less vulnerable.
Yeah, thank you. Petko?
Yeah, thank you. Well, I think there were some real important issues raised. The one on the budget is very complicated. I think any governance, the heart of any governance is the budget, is the finance, how we distribute. And I do believe we should be talking about this a lot more. And there are some very good and very positive moves now in the European Commission, and you know there's a new budget being discussed, and I'm really hopeful that many of those issues will be addressed. And coming back to what you said about defense spending, I don't think 2% is that much. I think it's sensible. And yes, we do have threats. We have wars not so far away from the European Union. We have the annexation. We have issues to look at, and we have various hybrid attacks that we seem unprepared to meet. And those are challenges we need to look at and really regroup and be united. I really find this is important. About the, I think there was some very good things said about inequalities and the free trade. Just a reminder, when we say free trade, it's not really free, right? There's so many subsidies. There's a complicated system of subsidies involved. It's a simplification, really. So multilateralism is the answer. Negotiations are the answer, and this is a constant thing going on. And I think the Iran deal that we spoke a little bit about, I think it's a very good example about Europe. We took the right decision. We stand by the agreement because it's about our security. So this, to me, is a positive example. Whether we are going to be able to keep the agreement, yet to be seen, but I think our position has been correct. You cannot expect everything to be agreed before you agree on something of such importance. And I think the US position is also correct. We need to address Iran's role in the region, Iran's ballistic system, and we should do it, but separately. Keep the deal and negotiate on. Negotiation is the crux of the matter and of our union. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Vassilis, briefly.
Yeah, very short.
We're running.
First, I'm going to be 2 minutes. First of all, nobody's denying the enormity of the task. Putting our house in order is an enormous task, and whoever doesn't accept that is indeed fooling themselves. But we shouldn't become despondent towards that. We shouldn't be afraid of it. In the face of such an enormous task, I think we need to try. It doesn't mean we will succeed, or at least to the extent that everyone wants, but we need to try. We need to avoid complacency, because that has characterized for a long time our relationship with the US. We need to be strategic about it, and we also need to be cognizant that the US, like any other major democracy, has an evolving domestic political system. We'll see what happened after the midterms, and we'll see how that changes Trump, if it does that. We need to be cognizant of that, but we also need to signal to Washington now, urgently, that we are ready to increase and also use the leverage we now have. Not necessarily only on trade, but on security and other aspects. And if that means increasing our defense spending, if that means moving towards less free riding, so be it. I'm all in favor of that. It's actually an unavoidable aspect of Europe growing up, maturing. Of course, with the usual caveat that Paweł mentioned, it's not only about what we spend, but where we spend it. And it's not just about the 2%. Also knowing that this will be a time-consuming exercise, because the strategic culture when it comes to defense matters is very different amongst many European states, and in Germany for that matter. So I would like us to see that, and to answer to the last question, what are our enemies? I would like us to see not necessarily saying X, Y, Z are our enemies, but being more cognizant of the challenges, which might be states, but also might be more transversal, horizontal issues like cyber. And we also need to be mindful of the fact that sometimes our biggest enemy is ourselves, our lack of unity. And I would close with that. I think it was Marcus Aurelius who said that the obstacle on the way needs to become the way. And I think it's a very good way of realizing where we stand, where we need to go to.
Yeah, thank you very much. It was recently famous Singaporean diplomat Kishore Mahbubani, who used to be ambassador to the United Nations, and he was criticizing the West a lot in the past. But recently, he wrote an opinion piece asking the West to maintain the multilateral system. And I think we should be aware that even critics of the West put some hopes that we'll be able to maintain the multilateral rules-based system, because there are challenges outside of the system which would like to destroy it. And we shouldn't give up. I like this last point. And we shouldn't forget that relations between United States and European Union is not only a relationship between Washington and Brussels. As United States is not only Washington, and European Union is not only Brussels. So let's think about the broader dimensions of our relations and roll up the sleeves, and we have to work. Thank you very much, and please join me in thanking the wonderful panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you.